India has an aspiration to become a developed nation, a high-income nation by 2047. Can it happen? Possibly yes. But can it happen at the current pace of growth and current pace of reforms? Probably not. That is the word coming in from the World Bank. They've examined different scenarios and come out with a detailed report on what India really needs to do in order to become a high-income country by 2047. Joining us right now to speak about World Bank's latest report is World Bank's Country Director for India, August Tano Kwame. August, thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome, Parashik. Thank you.
Give us a sense. Whether at this current pace of growth and reforms, why is it challenging for India to become a high-income country or a developed nation by 2047?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Let me start by saying that India has done a lot to achieve the growth rate that it has shown to date. And that effort that India put into getting to where it is today lays the foundation for doing more, for doing what it takes to become a developed nation by 2047. Over the past generation, over the past 25 years, India has achieved a growth rate of 6.3%, including years where growth was lowered because of shocks. So this is a very good achievement. And in fact, in the past 3 fiscal years, India's growth rate has exceeded 7% on average. And this takes India very close to what it needs to achieve as growth rate for the next 22 years to achieve the objective of becoming a high-income country by 2047. Our calculations show that India will need to maintain an average growth rate of 7.8% over the next 22 years to achieve its objective of becoming a developed nation. It is not impossible. Starting with over 7% now over the past 3 years, India can build on that. So what is required is what the report focuses on. The report focuses on what it will take for the 7.8% growth rate to be achieved and sustained over the next 22 years.
Right. You've examined 3 scenarios where India will be at different stages of growth by 2047. And there was only one scenario where the conditions would be right for India to become a high-income country by 2047. Give us the key details, key points, and key takeaways from scenario 3.
Okay, so growth is driven by factors and productivity. Under the scenario where India will achieve a high-income status by 2047, all the engines of growth will need to be fired up at a higher rate than the past, at a slightly higher rate than the past. First, on investment and capital. So our scenario suggests that investment will need to grow. Investment is at a respectable rate now. Private investment is around 25%. It will need to grow to about 30%. Added to that, you'll have public investment from the center and the state, and together, overall investment will need to reach 40%, right? And it is possible. It can be done. Second, on the human capital and labor side, the contribution to growth will need to be higher as well. And that means sectors that generate jobs will need to grow faster, such sectors such as agribusiness, the care economy, tourism. They have, and transportation, they have a high job content, so they will need to grow so that they employ more workers. And at the same time, the workforce will need to be skilled. We'll need, there will be a need for more investment in skilled workers, and also unblock or remove some of the constraints to labor force participation. India labor force participation, whether it is for male or female workers, is lower than the average for comparable countries. It's about 55%. It needs to grow at least to 60–65%. And female labor force participation in particular will need to grow even faster. So there are some constraints to labor force participation. It may have to do with the labor laws, labor codes. It may have to do with access to safe transportation for women or crashes for women. So these constraints can be removed in order for the contribution of labor to growth to be fired up even more. And on the productivity side, the economy grows when it is more productive, right? it's not just using more factors of production. You need to use them in an efficient way. And that requires a business environment that is agile, so the businesses don't spend a lot of time. A lot of time is money. They don't spend a lot of time in meeting heavy requirements. You need to facilitate access to modern technology that will make firms and workers become more efficient. And you need to integrate into global value chains so that there is a learning process of importing and exporting, and perhaps even be more open to FDI, which will bring new access to new technology.
Right. The report also speaks about the need for accelerated reforms. Give us a sense of the one area where such reforms are absolutely critical.
Well, actually, there is not just one area, there are a couple, but let me just give you one. Because it's not that intuitive. For me, it's land reforms, right? Because land is a constraint to investment, access to land, and especially for manufacturing. India wants to increase the share of manufacturing in the economy to maybe 25%, right? For that to happen, investors need to have easy access to land and secure access to land, because you need a place to build your factory. If you rely a lot more on services, maybe access to land is less of a constraint, but for manufacturing, access to land is very important. Now, India is also urbanizing fast, so land will need to be sort of reallocated from agriculture to manufacturing and to urban spaces. So to me, and this is important to think about, because land policy vary from state to state. So how you do that in a way that is perhaps harmonized, or perhaps equally easy for firms to invest in states so that all states can grow together, to me is one area where reform will need to be accelerated.
When you speak about India being more open to FDI and trade, give us a sense of how important is it for India to bring down tariffs, sign more FTAs?
For trade, there are three things that we pick up in the report. One is, yes, tariff. And, we call it cost of trading overall. India trade participant or firms will need to face a lower cost of trading if they're going to trade more. So tariff and non-tariff barriers are important to be reduced. Then there are trade costs, logistics. If it's easier to move things around, using physical as well as technological infrastructure, it lowers the cost of trade and it makes it easier for firms to trade. And third, global value chain insertion is also important. Trading, oftentimes when we kind of think of trade, we think of export, which is very important. But in today's world, the time when you produced one thing and then exported it has passed. Now, in order to produce what you want to export, you need to import something. So traders or trading partners are part of global value chains now. So when we think of trade, we need to think of both the import and export side. So insertion in this global value chain becomes important. You mentioned FTA specifically. I think this depends on individual countries. Some countries trade well without necessarily being part of FTAs. Some countries are part of FTAs. And in today's world, FTAs are being challenged left, right, and center. So I don't think countries should abandon the basic of trade, the trade agenda, by overly focusing on FTAs. The basic of trade agenda are actually the basics for economic growth, plus additional effort to reduce trade costs and trade barriers.
How do we ensure that the reforms that are carried out, in a way, are implemented by states to the last mile, and states are also in line with the government's vision for becoming a high-income country by 2047?
So let me start with the second part of that question. I think the alignment is almost absolutely necessary. I mean, I'm sure there are alignment between the center and the state on the 2047 vision, because I'm pretty sure that each state has, and I've seen this in the state that I've visited, they have a plan for where they want to be as a state by 2047. So if the states have those plans, I'm sure when you aggregate those plans, it gives you confidence that as a nation, India can achieve the 2047 goal. So, how do reforms? How will the reforms be implemented in states so that they can achieve their own 2047 goals? I think there is a partnership between the center and the state, which is working fairly well. You know, you have national level programs that support states in certain sectors, and perhaps there is a need to increase the incentive component of those programs so that when states benefit from those programs, they also do things that will be required for them to achieve their own goals. So, for example, in the recent union budget, the union budget announced the creation of the Urban Challenge Fund, which is a great program. It's a good example of how you can have a national level program that gives incentives to state to do the right thing. In this case, in urban development, because this needs to be done in a way that creates economic activity. It needs to create jobs in urban space. It needs to create livability in cities, and it needs to be done with the private sector through bankable projects.
Right.
So the Urban Challenge Fund will help do that, and so perhaps there is a need for more of that in the partnership between the center and the state. And of course, there is also it's also important that states become more efficient in using their own public resources, because the overall productivity in the economy is also driven by how efficient the public sector is, how efficient public investments are. And we see quite a lot of variation between states in the quality of public expenditures. So maybe there is a partnership to be had between the center and the state to ensure consistent approaches to efficient use of public resources.
Right. In your report, and as you mentioned also now, that what got you till here will not get you there. At the current pace of growth, what can India realistically achieve or be at by 2047?
I think for India, the thinking of the future based on the current rate of growth is not an option. I mean, it's an option if you just give up on ambition. India is ambitious. India wants to grow, and by the way, I think most countries are ambitious. They want to do better than the past, and there are few countries that can claim to have what it takes to achieve their ambition, and India has what it takes because India's past has been a lot more successful than many countries. Achieving more than 7% growth rate in the past 3 years is probably has not happened in more than a handful of countries in the world. Certainly not more than a couple of large economies in the world. So having achieved that, I think for India,